Welcome back to part 4 of our Glu-Lam passive house project in Albert Park. That's me in the blue jacket with the blonde hair. I'm Niall from Sunpath Architects, and these are some pictures of my childhood back in Ireland. I'm now practicing here in Melbourne, and I want to do a little video just explaining the inspiration and the design principles behind our own project. For the previous 16 or so years, I'd been designing people's houses and apartments, and I had a lot of ideas about what I might do when we finally got our own site and our own opportunity to build. Reflecting on that and kind of whittling those ideas down to find something appropriate for this site and location. Sailing, being on the sea and racing has always been a joy and a pleasure for me. I love that language of boats. I love the simplicity and the logic of it. And I wanted to reflect that in the structural choice that we'd made. I looked for cues around the area of Albert Park and Port Melbourne. We still get these ships coming to visit. We still have these piers and ports. We've got porthole windows, we've got old industrial buildings with gable fronts, things like that. That started to inspire this idea about how we might build our own home. I wanted to have this very strong, visible timber frame onto which we would hang and fix the hull, the waterproof elements like you would with a ship. Wanted the timber to be really strong like those old piers, and to sort of have this language of a boat that's been drawn up from the sea onto the safety of shore, kind of like an ark for our family against the elements and climate, but also a bit of a joke about being fresh off the boat. We have a very tight site, and I had to work out with the engineers how we could prefabricate all this so that everything could be easily delivered and carried through the site and installed in smaller prefabricated elements. So you can see here we've got each individual post beam being CNC machined and pre-drilled, pre-cut. David has already installed the base plates and welded on the flanges to accept these columns. So the columns are so small they can even be brought on a roof rack, and we've pre-treated and pre-oiled those. And David is here installing the joiner piece for the first floor beam, and we're just test installing the first columns and bracing them plumb. Now every module had to be broken into small enough elements that they could be manually lifted by 3 or 4 people, even these largest beams at the rear of the house. Oh, you beauty, look at that. Yeah, so as you can see, it's a really beautiful, rewarding and enjoyable moment in the project when you can see all of this careful thought and design that's been put into this timber structure actually taking place on site. That is great, man. Let's take a brief look at the construction detail of these junctions. We've got the stainless steel plates, and then we sleeve on the beams onto those. So after that, we hammer through a stainless steel pin, and that takes the place of the traditional oak dowel. Then we cap off those pre-drilled holes with a tapered timber peg. Along the boundary walls, we've rebaited out the blind side of the beams, and then they simply slot over these pre-installed aluminium angles, and we fix up and down into those angles. So then, with this method, after a few days, we've got this beautiful exposed timber frame taking shape on the ground floor. And that allows us to start constructing the first floor as a safe deck for assembly of the next batch of posts and beams forming the first floor structure. In Sunpath, we use as much timber as possible in our projects to reduce our embodied energy. It's also a natural material, it's renewable, and it's just a joy to work with, and it's really pleasant to actually have that tactility and that warmth inside your house. Here we're assembling that captain's quarters that's suspended out over the stern of the ship. You can see we're sleeving on those boundary beams, and then here we have the intermediate beams that will form the roof terrace in the center of the house. And this shot shows us the steel plates that are ready for the next batch of columns. And you can see the columns are all numbered and they're laid out in order of assembly on the first floor. By this stage, a two-man team of David and Lockie have established a real rhythm. They've assembled the stern of the ship, they've moved on to that mid-section that will be a roof terrace, and now they're assembling the front, the bow of the ship, where it steps down to meet the neighbour's roof lines. Then we infill in between the posts and beams with conventional timber framing. That will be the joists for the roof deck and the fascias for the front, and you can see here this will be the roof members, the sheeting and the preformed box gutters that will be along the boundary walls. So that allows them then to rapidly sheet out the top and get the weathertight membrane and tapes down, and then we can start installing the boundary wall panels. For our fire rated boundary walls, we've used a panel that has a core of rock wool insulation sandwiched between two skins of colour bond. We've installed those in a track that has weep holes and fire rated caulking, and each one arrives pre-cut from the factory. We've used an airtightness junction strip at the joint of each panel and from the panels to the roof. So they're hoisted using a crane and a vacuum lifting device from the flatbed truck roughly into position over their track, and then they're pushed along with the fire rated caulking applied at the junction, and then we begin to seal up the airtightness strips on the inside and join the panels together. So we've got 100mm of fire rated insulation that's very good acoustically, but we've also built an additional 90mm stud with a high density insulation inside this. So there's the panels installed with the airtightness strips and junction tape applied, and you can see we formed up the parapets and sealed those panels onto the external membrane as well. So after a couple of days you can see the entire boundary wall is complete, and we start to get a sense of what the space is like, what the quality of light and views will be once the house is complete. So we've enclosed all that volume really rapidly. We've already brought the windows upstairs ready for installation. The rapid enclosure of those boundary walls allows us to make great progress towards making this house locked up and weathertight. You can see here we started to rough in some of the glazing, and we've got that airtightness treatment at the junctions of all these boundary wall panels, and we're ready for laying a low CO2 concrete insulated screed slab on the ground floor. On the boundary wall, those panels have the joints visible and the rivets, and that's following in with that language of ship construction. So here's our exposed timber frame, and you can see what it does is it stops this house being a long tunnel-like form. It actually subtly divides it into these zones, this being the dining zone, and then stepping through into the kitchen, and then stepping down with a higher ceiling into the living room, and then that opens out onto what's like a diving platform at the rear of the house. So we'll further accentuate this timber by having it illuminated by a recessed LED lighting trough, and that light will fall onto the timber and then imbue the whole room with this warm golden glow of that oiled timber finish. So I've used a combination of that timber framework and the multiple sources of natural light to break up the tunnel-like effect that you can get in a long Melburnian site like this. Now we're ready to lay a screed slab that's fully insulated to the base and perimeters, and in the next video we'll look at some of the essential ingredients that will turn this into a passive house. Thanks for joining.